What?
He might be getting coffee.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the December 22nd meeting of the Halton Police Board. My name is Graham Milne. I am the Board Secretary, and my purpose this morning is to conduct the election of the Chair and Vice Chair for the new year. I'd like to, at this time, open the floor to nominations for the position of Chair, please. Ingrid.
I would like to nominate Jeff Dole as Chair, please.
Thank you. Jeff, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations for the position of Chair? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Jeff Knoll has been nominated as Chair of the Halton Police Board. All those in favor? That carries. Congratulations, Councillor Knoll. If you'd like to take over the seat and conduct the election of Vice Chair, please.
That's quicker than, that's a problem.
Any sweat on your brow?
So now I have to take down all the darn election signs.
Well, first of all, thank you for the honor of being re-elected as chair. I've truly enjoyed this role since I've had it, and I think we've made some great progress. And I appreciate your confidence in selecting me to chair these meetings and to be the board chair for the next year. So look forward to the year ahead. With that, the next matter of business is the election of a vice chair, and I would be happy to nominate Ingrid if she's interested in serving. And look, if that's, are you willing to serve?
Thank you, Mr.
Are there other nominations for that position? Seeing none, do I do a motion to close nominations? I forgot what you just did already. Okay. Seeing that there are no other nominations, I would announce that Ingrid Hahn is declared acclaimed as our vice chair. Congratulations, Ingrid.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Committee Secretary, do we have any regrets today?
Yes, we have Councillor regrets from Councillor Somerville and Mr. Foster.
Thank you. Moving on, disclosures of pecuniary and conflict of interest. I don't see any, so we can move on to the minutes. Our last meeting was held on Thursday, November 10th, and the minutes were circulated. Are there any questions, comments, errors, or omissions to report? I need this today because we don't have to be on Zoom. I don't see any, so I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes, please. Kurt and Ingrid, thank you very much. All in favor? They are approved. I will take a moment now to introduce a new member of our board today. Joining us for the first time ever is Lisa Kearns, who is a city councillor from the city of Burlington. What ward do you represent, Lisa? Two. Lisa represents, and it's the downtown area of Burlington, correct?
Yeah.
So Lisa is a city councillor. This is her, she's starting her second term on city council. And unfortunately, our previous colleague, Pavan Parmar, was not re-elected, so she was not eligible to be appointed. But we're very fortunate to have a very experienced and wonderful replacement for Pavan's position, and that is Lisa. And of course, Clark Somerville is not able to be with us today due to the proximity of the holidays, was also re-elected by the Regional Council, as was I. So welcome aboard, Lisa. We look forward to working with you for the next 4 years. We do not have any presentations on the agenda, except we will have a presentation of the budget later, but it's not on this particular agenda item. We have two items on our consent agenda. We have the facilities update for 2022 and secondary employment statistics for 2022. Are there any questions, or would somebody like to separate either of those items? Ingrid?
I have some questions, please.
On which one?
On both.
Okay, so let's just take them one at a time then. So 3.1 is the 2022 facilities update. Ingrid, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're looking at renovations here at headquarters, and I understand it's for the centralized computer crime unit. So the question I have is, how big is this renovation? Because as I read the details, we're applying for a building permit. And so we're going to not just renovate, we're going to expand the premises. No?
No, and certainly, do you want to speak to that, Chuck? We won't be going outside of the walls. It's a major internal renovation. I think we hope we can do it for significantly less, but we get into issues with the HVAC system. So I would say just put up a wall and make this happen, and people say we need HVAC to come in and change some different things. So it's very important that we get this done, but.
So if you can imagine, it's a room already existing in the building, but it's in a room that was not completed during construction. It's literally just walls, there's nothing in it, so it's completely empty. So to put the computer crime unit in that you'll hear some parts of in our budget, in regards to the people, we completely have to build up the room, including every single piece of it. So that's what it is, and there's a connection to our regional mobilization that's connected to it, but there's some minor alterations that are going there just to make their area a little bit more efficient. So that's why we need to permit.
And the timing for the completion?
We just finished up with the budget, talking with the budget this week with Greg and Paul's team today, so we'll be going out for tender shortly.
So we should see it completed this year?
No, not this year, no chance.
I mean, 23.
Yeah.
23.
I'd like this year.
Yeah.
Raj and I became drywallers, so.
Yeah, we're drywalling.
We're drywalling. We started our own company in the short. Hiring Christmas elves to come in and do it.
Yeah. Might be a bit of pressure, but we're 22. All right, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything, further questions on the facilities update? Lisa?
Thank you very much. Just noting that there's no facility proposals for Oakville and Burlington, which is two major districts. Do you foresee any state of good repair deficiencies in the upcoming years?
No, those buildings are both relatively new, so once we get the new building built for the north end to serve both Halton Hills and Milton for a period of time, all of our buildings will be relatively new. The Burlington building is in good repair, as is Oakville.
And no surprises for 2023?
No.
Great.
Well, they will be surprises if they are.
Well, you can count on the surprises. Further questions on the facilities update? Not seeing any. Can I get a motion to receive the report, please? Thank you, Navneet, and seconded by Lisa. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Ingrid, you wanted to talk about the secondary employment report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm always intrigued when I get these reports to see what it is that people are doing. And the one that jumps out, and I don't understand how it can work, is this one, the real estate agent. How can one, and I don't know if this is a uniformed officer or if this is a civilian, but being a real estate agent requires a lot of time and a lot of commitment in terms of dealing with the potential sales. How can this work with a person's work schedule?
Well, through the chair, I'd have to check if it's a uniform or civilian person, but the parameters around secondary employment is it shall not interfere with your primary position here.
Right.
So there are real estate agents who work 20 hours a day and every Saturday and Sunday doing open houses, and there are people that do it on much more of a part-time basis. Some people may be feeling it out to see if that's going to become a full-time role later on, at which point they would leave the service potentially. But I think there is a way for people to do it more of a part-time. And I know real estate agents who do it more part-time, and if you and I shared an office or a profession, you may agree to do all the open houses or showings while I'm otherwise employed. So it's more the position of, I do not think that I could deny it or turn it down, because if they're doing it without it being a conflict.
I would think that there have to be some restrictions in terms of the amount of time that the individual spends on this. Again, it would be interesting to know if it's an officer or if it's a civilian.
I think it may be a civilian. Deputy Hill was just saying it looks like it's a part-time employee here too, so it makes even more sense. And people are trying to make ends meet, especially when they're part-time or they're at the lower end of a salary scale. Dispatchers, for example, who are working 4 days on, 4 days off, starting at a lower salary, but they can supplement their income in this environment, in this part of Ontario, also makes sense. It used to be that every sworn officer had to ask for permission of the chief for any secondary employment. it really, years ago, switched to where if the officer thinks that that secondary employment may be a conflict, then they have to. So there are lots of people who could potentially have some form of secondary employment, and they're not even required to ask me for permission. I think it's good. I feel a lot of people still do ask for permission, which is nice, and we know about it and we can monitor it. But the fact is, there's a lot of things that people could be doing, secondary employment, we would never know of, and I would never have a chance to approve or deny.
It's just an area that would allow some opportunity for conducting the business during the person's regular work time. And I think that would need to be monitored.
That would be a conflict. We also have a civilian member who is a part-time flight attendant. I always go back to the old words, but part-time flight attendant, but she can manage that on 4 days off. So it's interesting.
All right, well, thank you for the explanation. It gave me some concern.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ingrid. Since the matter's been held, I'll just ask this question. I see volunteer firefighters listed here. So volunteer positions are required to be vetted by the chief as well?
Well, if you listen to the Professional Firefighters Association, there's no such thing as a volunteer firefighter, because they actually get paid. So there's a lot of discrepancies between professional firefighters, hard feelings at times between the professional firefighters and the volunteer firefighters, but they do actually get paid on a call-out basis or on training basis. So I don't think there's any true volunteer firefighters.
Didn't realize that we don't have those in Oakville, so I wasn't aware of that. And this is a more important question. I see we have one person selling baked goods, and I think that we need to bring them to the board so that we can actually sample the baked goods before we receive this report.
It definitely looked like it today.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Ingrid, you held the report. Would you mind moving receipt, please?
I'll move it. Can I ask?
Absolutely. Yes, you want baked goods?
Pardon? No, it's not about the baked goods. The secondary employment where somebody is providing technical support to another police service, I assume that's a civilian position, is it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think what we need to be careful of is we need to be careful not, the purpose of this is conflict, right? Conflict of interest. And I might second guess sometimes the time, like Ingrid was pointing out, that someone is putting into a second employment. But, having been a police officer, I think we need to understand that with shifting the way it is, people are off a lot. They work a lot, but they're off a lot, and people are looking for something to do, and they look over the fence at the firefighters and who enjoy those same privileges, right? So I have to shift my mind and come forward 30 or 40 years to catch up with the current times, I guess, but that's just the way life is today, as long as there's no conflict.
And I think through the chair, what we're seeing, I'll use a hypothetical example. If a senior officer left Halton and became a chief of police somewhere, they would know some people here with expertise in human resource management or mapping strategies, and they could employ those people on a part-time basis, knowing what they're getting. So it's not really an ad hoc thing where people are going to different services at random.
Thank you. Will you second?
I'll move it or second it.
Ingrid, you can second it. Thank you. All in favor? Items received. Okay, that finishes up our consent agenda. Moving on to our discussion items. The first item on the agenda is 4.1, which is the funding request and 10-year capital forecast. So I would say this is largely the big show today. Mr. Chief, do you have a presentation to provide us with this morning?
I'm just looking at 4.1. So the entire budget, not just the 10-year capital budget. Certainly, we can
I was reading what the heading is. Yeah.
Move into the full budget presentation. And Paul Laverne is unable to be here today, but I think he's joining us online. And Greg is here. Greg Kinnear is here from finance. Just before I start, I did want to introduce to the board Detective Sergeant Ellie Bale, is here, sitting behind me. This week, she's still the Detective Sergeant in our Professional Standards Bureau, and as of January 1st, she will be the President of the Halton Regional Police Association. So Ellie ran in the election and was successful becoming the President, so she will replace Clay Gillis, who is returning to the service, and Clay will be assigned to Milton in an investigative role in our detective office. So just wanted to introduce Ellie, and thank you. Thank you. Congratulations. So it's always interesting when we get into budget. Some of us around the table have done quite a few of these now. You know, we reflect on what the real purpose of the budget is and why we do it the way that we do, bringing it to the board through the police service. And really, it's all about the ensuring at the board level, from a governance perspective, and at a chief level and senior executive team level with the deputies and I, that we are seeking adequate and effective levels of resources, or appropriate levels of resources, whether that's technology or staffing, to ensure that we will be able to say in good faith that we are addressing the needs of the service and of the community, and that we can say that we are adequate and effective. This year, we were given a 4.7 guideline from the region. Usually we come in at the level of the regional request. For 2 years, we were slightly over that. If you remember going back a couple of years, the guideline was 3.7. We came in at 4.2. It was fully supported by the board and by the region, because the only reason for the 0.5 difference was a reduction in funding by the provincial government of $800,000 in each of those years for prisoner care and transportation. So really, the budget didn't change in those years. It's just that the regional dollars made that budget whole moving forward. This year, we would, in fact, and we'll get into the details of the numbers, we would be at 4.7, except for two major sources of impact. That is the very high escalating cost of the new building being built in Milton, where it would have been built in 2015 or 16 at about $300 a square foot, and estimates right now are at $800 a square foot. That will be about 0.6 of the 1% difference. And then the cost of where we need, and it's been a separate presentation to the board, on some cybersecurity risk areas will be the other 0.4%. Greg and Paul have done a great job again of putting this budget together, along with some pie charts and things, and we'll talk a little bit more about the breakdown as we move forward. We've had great discussions, as we always do, between our finance staff, Paul LeBurn and Greg Kinnear, and Jane McCaskill, the CEO at the region, and her staff in relation to the budget. I know, I'm confident that the region will certainly be able to absorb our 5.7% increase within an overall 4.7% increase for the region, or most likely less than that. So I think we're in a good position with the region. Because this is our public session, and we may have members of the public, I know board members have seen this presentation ahead of the meeting, but we'll go through some of the slides. Certainly, all of our budgets are built from the ground up every year, looking at increased areas of needs, and based on our corporate business plan, we will be undertaking a new corporate business planning process. The board will, along with us in 2023. But we do have that vision to be the leader in community safety and policing excellence. And there does need to be investments in police services, just as in other parts of regional government and service areas, to ensure that we keep at the level that we are. Greg, are you doing okay? Thanks. And we show this, every year, and I suppose at the board level, as long as we stay at this level, we're very, very close to it. We don't have to show this every year, but I think when you look at our ranking when it comes to overall crime rate, crime severity index, broken down into violent and non-violent, which is really property crime, our clearance rates and the success, and Chair Noel mentioned that in his speaking notes last night at the swearing-in ceremony, our very lowest staff per population level and our lowest cost per capita, there still is an investment that needs to be made to keep us at this level. And we are a region which is growing faster than many. We're realizing some of the impacts of that increased population and diversity of our population and all of the societal complexities that come along with growth, high-density housing, and issues, whether it's mental health and the impact of mental health in our communities, drug and alcohol addiction, traffic. And traffic is always, and I know members of the board who are also municipal councilors or have been, that is probably the one thing you hear about the most is traffic. And as our population goes from 700 or 750,000 to 1 million in the next few years, traffic is not going to get less. Some of the cars may or may not be more electric, but people are going to be driving. And in our region, because of some of the economics of our region, most people tend to have cars. That may not be the case in some areas of a very dense downtown Toronto where people don't even have their own vehicles, but that's not the case in Halton. So we continue to see the impacts of those things. The corporate business plan will always, and I'm assuming roughly, our next business plan will probably mirror the 4 key themes of community safety and well-being, outreach and collaboration, capability and engagement. And capability is somewhat tied to resourcing and technological advancements and ways that we can make perhaps our frontline members more effective and efficient. Things like our electronic notes that are now in place, hopefully will save officers time. Our alternate response unit, which had a major success just recently in some of the multi-million-dollar takedown of some organized retail theft groups. That's done largely from officers, some accommodated, some not, who are working here, but are taking a lot of those theft calls and doing those investigations, taking some of that workload away from our frontline officers who have this feeling, and we hear this from the association continually, that they're going from call to call. And putting that in the perspective of it's adding to mental health or stress and a variety of other things that we will hear from our association and perhaps during upcoming bargaining. Next slide, please. We always, hopefully these things would go without saying, but we are always going to, and the deputies and I and other senior managers can assure you that we will maximize the deployment of officers to meet emerging trends and the frontline duties that they need to perform. The alternate response unit is just one example of some efficiencies that we can find. The overlaying of special units, and sometimes our frontline officers can forget that there are a lot of other resources there as well to help them because of the investments that have been made by this Police Services Board and by the region. It used to be years ago that homicides would be dealt with out of the districts largely. We've got centralized, specialized units, obviously for homicide, for child and sexual assault investigations, with very large investments in domestic violence, so that the most serious domestic violence incidents are taken over by highly trained detectives and detective constables, taking a lot of the behind-the-scenes workload away from those frontline officers so we can get them back to the road. But when you're out there at 4 o'clock in the morning and you look around and 10 or 12 out of the 20 names that are on your platoon are there working at 3 or 4 in the morning, they start to feel like they're alone. But we do have this multi-layered level of support over top of all of our officers, including our tactical rescue unit, our K9 units, and some of you on our recent tour of the region saw some of those centralized units here, our traffic reconstruction unit, including the 3D camera. But that sort of thing has been an investment which pays dividends. We need to upgrade and replace our frontline technology tools. We pride ourselves in being progressive when it comes to technology, which unfortunately also comes with a cost. And you've seen a number of board reports, or you will be later today, which directly relate to the cost of technology. And the fact that, and this is seen in our municipal world, our regional world, where we used to invest in a system, if I can simplify it to an IT system, we'd pay a certain amount of money and there'd be a little bit of upkeep. The industry really has switched to charging us license fees for everything. It's a great move on their part from a revenue generation perspective, but there's no way around it. And so we see the cost of licensing fees in relation to a variety of our critical internal and external connected systems because of the change in the actual industries that are providing those technologies to us. The continued development of consolidated one district facility, we did, it's good news. These things move far too slowly in my view, or with my hopes. I wish it was already built. Just this past week, the region crossed the final T so that the property actually technically belongs to the region. Now it can be more fully developed, and we're moving forward with the planning for that facility. But as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that's coming at more than 2 or 2.5 times the cost of what it would have been just a few years ago. We always mention Peel's principles of policing, not always all 9 of them, but we need to engage our communities. We're heavily invested in community safety and well-being, and some of you have joined online or in person with the senior leadership team of CSWB, where we've been very successful bringing in the leaders of hospitals and mental health associations of the region, and actually to have it chaired by the CAO of the region, take it sort of arm's length from us so that we can ensure that the right resources, the right community support resources address some of the societal issues that we're dealing with, because they're not all police issues, and police cannot always be the most highly trained experts in everything. So I think it's going to continue to pay dividends. The investment that the region's made and the community investment funds that are available through the region, it's a very highly developed process, and Roger has been integrally involved with all of that. We can expand on any of these points that you would like. For the 2023 budget impacts, we know that we're going to see continued population growth. We see it in Burlington, sort of the more high density of downtown Burlington and other areas, Oakville, around Trafalgar and Dundas, and moving and sprawling north, and of course Milton. For a number of years, Milton has been, and I think will continue to be, the fastest growing city in Canada, and it's going to have impacts on us. Increased population leads to increased crime. It's maybe not a straight linear relationship, but it's a relationship. Increased traffic, increased mental health issues, increased societal issues, drug addiction that we're continuing to deal with. And then there are trends within areas of crime. We had approximately 850 stolen vehicles in 2021. We've just hit over 1,200 this year. Some very successful projects have been done, including a project takedown that was just announced and a media release within York Region yesterday, where we've been working in a joint force operation with them, and Peel and others recovered 200 vehicles at a value of about $17 million. But that trend is going to continue. I know Ingrid, as a member of the board, mentioned earlier, hopefully there's a deterrent to this. But as long as those vehicles are stolen at no cost or low cost and sold for $50,000 or $100,000, organized crime is going to be in that business. So it is going to continue, and until the auto manufacturers change some of the characteristics of, in particular, certain vehicles, that's going to continue. And as I've said, I know here before, it's harder to sign onto my laptop in the morning than it is to steal your Lexus out of your driveway at 3 o'clock. So there's got to be some changes. I think some of that pressure through OACP, CACP, and others working with actually the insurance industry. The insurance industry might be the ones that can put some more pressure on the automotive manufacturers, but there's always an impact or potential impact of provincial funding decisions relating to subsidy programs when it comes to policing. I will say very publicly, we have the most supportive provincial government that I can imagine, and the most supportive government that I've worked with in my 24 years now as a chief and a deputy chief, when it comes to funding policing on a priority basis, whether it's guns and gangs, human trafficking, organized crime, investment in the Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario, or otherwise. We do have the support of the provincial government. But with the issues they're dealing with, including health, and where now our ex-minister is now the Minister of Health, and Sylvia is dealing with a lot of issues there, or education, we don't know when things could change. So we always want to highlight funding as a potential impact, but we do not foresee anything in 2023. We have upcoming contract negotiations. We could speak to Ellie about that, but we won't. But we are, both the HRPA and the Halton Regional Police Senior Officers Association and the board have communicated that they will be entering into a collective bargaining process sometime early or spring of 2023. Working along with the board and some regional staff, will be collecting some information in relation to that for both the associations and for the boards. The outcome of that is a bit of an unknown always, but we do need to build in some reasonable costs. There will be some form of a settlement when it comes to salary and or benefits. Inflation, in relation to one district, we've mentioned already, and then the sub-point there is the cost of fuel. Every 10 cents costs us $140,000 a year. We have increased our fuel budget, I believe, from $1.30 to $1.36 for 2023. That mirrors what the region has done. That may be low, hope it isn't, but if it is low, we will absorb it, as we do a number of other areas where we go over budget, and we know we will go over budget, but we have savings primarily through gap hiring and the time that it takes between someone leaving an organization and when we hire them, or even if the additional staff are approved in this budget, they're not all going to be here January 1st. So some of the overtures we will be able to absorb, and then still have a surplus. I believe our surplus this year, for us approaching the end of 2022, will be around $3 million. But we need that. We cannot put that towards this budget, as you know, but that does go into reserves, and those reserves help to fund some of our ongoing other major capital impacts, including other parts of the one district facility bill. The complexity and multi-jurisdictional nature of serious crime, we've seen that. I will say that our last two homicides did not involve on either side of the offenses, Halton residents per se. A lot of crime will continue to come to us from other parts of the Greater Toronto area, whether it's Toronto-based street gangs or Edmonton or Vancouver-based gangs involved in the drug trade, human trafficking, and other things. There will be serious crimes that will continue to occur here and elsewhere other than where they actually began. Of course, the impact of mental health on our calls for service and resources, and also the impact on our members. We're certainly seeing, and it's not any different than any other police service or emergency service provider, but we have members who have mental health situations that they're dealing with. We're trying to destigmatize that. We have a very robust internal organizational wellness unit in place to assist our members. They act proactively after tragic incidents or serious incidents. I think we're very well positioned here as far as what we are doing so far. But when we're telling people it's okay not to be okay, we should not be surprised when someone puts their hand up and says they're not okay. So we do have a number of frontline people who are off on long-term absences, which is also another part of our resourcing needs. Anecdotally, I would say I believe that the percentage, if we look at a percentage of our people who are off suffering from those types of things, are lower than what I'm hearing is the case in other similar regional police services. That may be in part our environment that we work in, the sort of socioeconomic realities of Halton compared to cities close to us. But nonetheless, we do have people that are legitimately unable to come to work. So if we go to the budget comparisons, you'll see, and any questions that anyone has at any point going through this, also Greg is here to answer any technical questions, or Paul, possibly online, or he will text to us. But you'll see at the bottom, the percent increase is 5.7. I will mention, when we look at, we talked a lot, the deputies and I and other senior management members talk a lot about what is the right number for Halton. And we probably had input from our different levels of managers for more than twice this many people being hired in 2023. And we pare that down invariably every year to what we think is reasonable and what we can support as being adequate and effective. So then sometimes I would say that I look around and I see where the Peel Police Services Board has just approved their budget at 8.2%. Waterloo, I believe, is at 10 or 11. I'm not sure if it's been finally approved by the Police Services Board. Sarnia's at 11.5, Barrie's at 7.3. And so once in a while I wake up thinking, well, should we really be at 6.7? I am comfortable with being at 5.7, but I want to paint that backdrop of what realities are happening in other comparable services in Ontario. And the other thing that we also don't want to do is put ourselves in a position, and Deputy Chief Wilkie often talks about this, we don't want to be 5 or 7 years from now and coming and saying we need to hire 100 people because we have not been keeping up with growth. And by the way, the increase is going to be 10 or 15%. So we want to take the measured approach, which we feel that we're doing in this budget at 5.7, with the reality being we would be at 4.7, except for one district and cybersecurity. This chart actually, I think, does a very good job of portraying that in more of a graphical way, where the sources of the impact are compensation at 2.1, the darkest part of the pie chart on the top right-hand side. Staffing increase equates to 1.3%. Benefit costs. And benefit costs are largely beyond our control. Halton Regional Police Service benefits are provided through the region. They have never been, to my knowledge, and certainly not in the last 10 years, they've never been independently researched or negotiated by the Police Services Board. I think the reason has been there's a bit of a value for the region and perhaps for us being in a larger group, and the age of some of our members may help the overall regional impacts, but there are some circumstances where boards research and independently negotiate benefits. There could be potential costs, but there are also some benefits of playing with our neighbors and our partners in the larger employee pool. When you add technology costs, all other costs, including fuel, it quickly comes up to that 5.7. On the frontline resource side, this is what we're looking at within those budget dollars. We will hire 6 civilian positions, but one of those is a conversion to full-time. We will hire 5 new positions. And we have absorbed, I think, 2 others where we had positions that were, we use the word redundant, but they were vacant and we did not intend to fill them, so we can move those salary dollars to hire other more prioritized positions. That's been done as well. And then there would be 16 frontline officers and 4 specialized unit officers. If the board would like us to break that down more at this point or later, at the wish of the chair. Now or subject to questions?
Are you including your presentation?
No, just this page.
No, why don't you keep going and we'll capture that in questions afterwards.
Okay. So the 16 frontline officers, because we have 16 platoons between Oakville, Burlington, Milton, and Halton Hills, really is 1 officer on average per platoon. And then Jeff would be prepared to speak later on the importance of the 4 specialized positions. The impact of the new frontline officers, and I know that the board and Fred have asked questions over the past couple months. Where's the value in each employee? We know that the expected outcomes, because of the increased population, there's going to be increased demand for service. If we don't hire more people, it's going to be more work on the ones that are already here, who are already saying and feeling and perceiving that they're overworked and they don't have enough resources at the front line. There will be a number of impacts, and what I wanted to do is break this down to what every officer potentially does. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. If the 16 officers are working frontline uniform, and we use a number, and I'm not saying this publicly as a quota, but I would think a lot of our frontline officers average somewhere around 20 HTA tickets per month. 16 officers, 20 tickets per month. This is traffic enforcement. Don't think about it as tickets. And 12 months is 3,840 HTA offenses where people would be held accountable, responsible for, and or charged with a Highway Traffic Act offense. That money never flows to us. I'm not asking for it. It's a political nightmare that I've turned down in other services, but just that level of Highway Traffic Act enforcement would be about $770, close to $800,000 per year, which flows back then to the region and to municipal government in different ways, not to the police service. But there is certainly a revenue portion to that. But those officers are probably also going to warn drivers at least that many times or twice as often. So you're going to get 4,000 or 8,000 more people who are stopped for a traffic infraction. They're spoken to, they're educated, hopefully some of their driving behavior changes. So how do we measure the impact of that? That's the difficult part. Are they not going to go through the stop sign the next day? Maybe they will. We now capture those warnings so that if someone has been warned 2 or 3 times, they're more apt to be charged the 3rd or 4th time. But there's a very difficult to analyze impact of traffic enforcement and warnings and visibility when it comes to one of the most highly prioritized issues that our citizens have. So is it important? Are another 4,000 tickets important? I think they are from a highway safety perspective. So that's just one of the things that each officer potentially will add on the traffic side of things. They're also going to be involved in criminal investigations. It's going to be a workload issue. That will take a little bit of work away from the other frontline uniformed patrol officers. They're still all going to be doing a lot of work. They're going to be laying criminal charges. They're going to be gaining that expertise. And when you see, I know each of you have been at a swearing-in ceremony. Not all of you could be there last night, but when you see the quality of the people that we are hiring, that our recruiters are identifying and hiring here, the potential of what every one of those individuals is going to be able to do is just exponential. It was a thrill again last night to hear the bios and the backgrounds of those people that were being sworn in as frontline members. So when you have sat in some of those swearing-in ceremonies, or you were there last night and you're thinking about all the good that any one of those individuals is going to be able to do next year or over the next 30 years, that is what we want the potential of each one of these members to be able to do. Again, traffic safety and enforcement is always one of the main priorities of our citizens. We know crime's increasing. I mentioned even just auto theft from 850 last year to over 1,200 this year. I think that's going to continue. Is each individual frontline officer going to stop that? No, it's organized crime, but they may stop some of it. They may prevent some of it. And it's so very hard to put sort of a KPI to what that one officer working in Oakville or Burlington is going to do in relation to traffic auto theft. But it's also a part reasonably of addressing the frontline workload. We always look at response times. Again, one more officer, you may have someone closer to a crime in progress, you may not. But the reality, they may be on lunch or they may be off that day. But there are certainly frontline impacts. And that's, I think I mentioned, the decreased workload for the perception of our frontline officers. As we enter into bargaining where resources may be an issue or not, and we look at the level of stress or mental health of our frontline officers, I don't think the value of each additional officer could be overstated. I think it sends a very clear signal that our, in this case, the Police Services Board as our governing body, and I believe Regional Council on January 11th, support the fact that we are a growing region. We need additional resources here. Sometimes it's easier in other parts of emergency services. I think we talked just recently about fire departments. When cities grow, it's automatic. There's some formula, algorithm comes out, and you need a new station because there's X number of people, and for every station you need 20 or 25 firefighters because you need 3 firefighters on each truck or whatever it is. We don't have that sort of legislation, but I think when people are making those decisions on the emergency services, and the same thing for our paramedics, I mean, our EMS and Chief Sage are going to have to look at growth in our paramedic services when they're responding to increased populations and complexities and overdoses. So they're not apples and apples, but if it's reasonable to increase the fire department by 10% because population went up by 10%, something similar is probably important to look at when it comes to police resourcing and staffing. The financial forecast, I know you've had a chance to review these slides. Greg, did you have any specific comment or any questions on this by any of the board members?
So in general, when we prepare this, we have a few drivers that drive the year-to-year increases on the slide. We're looking at projected salary increases. We're looking at inflation rates. We generally keep all of the inflation rates for all of our supplies and services at a lower rate. We have experienced over time and built into this the cost of our IT-related items at a higher than inflationary rate just based on our history. So we built that in. It also includes all of the financing costs related to all of our capital and our 10-year capital plan. The biggest item being that we also have an additional $1.2 million of financing that will be coming into our budget next year in 2024. You'll see that in the finance costs under 2024. That's why it's going from 9.2 to 10.5. So that's going to be a challenge for us again next year. And then we keep all of our revenues and recoveries that we get for funding at similar rates that we've seen in the past. This generally will allow us to, so in 2024, this will allow us, as it stands, to hire lower than our normal expected number of officers. We'd be in the 6 or 7 officer range instead of our regular 17 or 18, and that's because of that $1.2 million of additional funding. But the rest of the years in 25, 26, 27, we would be looking to hire our normal sort of annual amount that we've seen in the last few years of around 18 officers and about 7 or 8 civilians after we factor in which vacant positions we can reutilize.
And the next page sort of speaks to that as well. So we always present the year-over-year budget percent graph as the next one, Greg. There certainly were high years back in the early, I was thinking, what do you call them, thousands and tens. It's easier to say 80s and 90s for me than to say the 10s and 20s, but we're getting there. We've been pretty level and stable certainly over the past 10 years, came down and then level across, and looking at the projected budget impacts that Greg just spoke to. And then the 10-year capital forecast is something that the region asked us to do. So Paul and Greg, working along with regional finance staff, put a lot of time and I'm sure headaches into preparing some of these, but I'll leave that for questions if anyone has questions later on. It's interesting how, and it's the way we've always done it here, to my knowledge, absorbing capital costs in the operating budget for the police service, and I'm sure other departments within the region of Halton. In Kingston, I wish it was like this. We're not going to change it. In Kingston, capital budget and operating budget were completely different. So the capital cost of the new police station in Kingston never touched the operating cost. Obviously, it left more room and flexibility for hiring and other operating issues, but a different city and a different time. The expected outcomes of the budget. And this would, subject to your wishes for January 11th, Mr. Chair, would probably be mirrored in our presentation when we do it to Regional Council. It's similar to what we've done in previous years. We want to keep Halton the safest large municipality in Canada. We want to continue the leadership role or position that we have when it comes to all of those key comparators. I do have some charts that we've added in a little bit later. We can flip to where we are clearly the lowest cost per capita and clearly the lowest police officer per population of all of the Big 12 services. I know you're familiar with the Big 12 police services boards and others. We're still in a position where we would have to hire 60 officers to come to the level of the next lowest police officer per population police service, which right now is Waterloo. If Waterloo's budget increase is 10 or 11% this year, they're obviously going to be hiring much more. So hiring 20 here, we're going to be still far lower in cost per capita and police officer per population from all those other comparators, including the closest one. And that really just repeats which Greg to page 26. This is the graph that actually shows the cost per capita, not capital, versus the Big 12. And we are always, and we will continue to be in that, I suppose, enviable position. I wouldn't want to be coming here today saying we want to be at Windsor's position and hiring 600 people. So, but it is good that we will still be in these positions, I'm sure, from a variety of perspectives, and also when it goes to Regional Council. That's the basic budget presentation for the public session. Subject to any comments from the deputies or questions from board members.
Good. Any feedback before we go to questions? I just want to clarify two things before I go to my board. I noticed that the presentation that we were provided is 19 pages, and you had 26 plus pages in the one that you were working.
We added in just a whole bunch of background information that isn't normally.
Can you provide that to the board?
Sure.
After the fact, so that we've got that, and we provide that to Greg, and we'll get that in our board portal.
Great.
My second one was, can you unpack the revenues? You have the revenue line. Can you just unpack what those revenues, how they're derived?
Sure. Greg can.
Yeah. No, I said you could.
I probably could.
Yeah.
Greg can do it better.
Okay. Let me, I don't think we have a slide ready for it, but I can definitely talk to it. So I can definitely talk to what the changes are. So the biggest changes this year.
Well, could you provide first a summary for anybody, like, remember we're talking to the public are watching, and we have a new board member as well. So if we could just unpack, if you give us the broad categories and talk about the changes, that'd be good. Because I think that if the public probably perceives that revenue is every time somebody gets a ticket, that money is just flowing into our bank accounts. I think that it's important to understand where that revenue comes from and where it doesn't come from, probably as importantly.
So just as Greg's looking that up, I mean, I know it's been reworded. A large amount of our funding from the province used to come through the two separate 1,000 additional officers in the province of Ontario funding lines. They've melded that into a different name now, but I think relatively stable, maybe went down a little bit.
So we have, as an organization, we have approximately $14 million of revenues and recoveries. The first main section of that would be government subsidies. So in total, we get approximately $6.5 million of government subsidies, and I'll come back and give that some more detail in a second. We then also have program fees, or sort of service recovery. So, for example, some of the larger items that would be in that category would be security clearances or FOI requests or things like that. So that's an area where we have a consistent history of how much we're recovering, and all those recovery fees are based on us just meeting our costs. We're not looking to make profit on that money. Those are items and fees based on just pure cost recovery, no revenue per se, it's a recovery. We also have external recoveries that we get as an organization that are about $3 million a year. The biggest item in there would be secondment. So, for example, we as a service would second officers, and one of the places that they would go would be to the Ontario Police College. Sometimes we may have 4 officers or 2 officers helping out at the Ontario Police College. So we get that money back, and essentially it means that that officer isn't costing us anything as a service. So we're getting full cost recovery for the salary that we're paying that officer, and then they're working at OPC and we're getting that money back. We also get some external recoveries to help us in some other facets of our business, most notably for in some of the specialized units where we're working with mental health. There's some funding that we get in those areas. We also have our pay duty recoveries. This is about, so we pay our officers, then we recover the money for those. So that pay duty revenue is about $1 million a year. It's not, again, it's something we're not making money off. It's just recovering the costs that we're incurring elsewhere in our financials. We have about $2.5 million of movement of reserves, so taking money from the reserves to help us finance our capital and some of our other operations, and that's partially determined through the region. And then we have some other recoveries that we have that are like $300,000 or $400,000. And the main items in there would be some cost recovery we get from the region related to taking 911 calls, or related to the radio trunking system. So in terms of that, we take the lead in terms of running that system, and we've worked with our partners through the region that are on that system and developed a cost recovery model. I think at the end of the day, we as a service take in about 75% of the cost lie with us, but the other 25% then get recovered through the other partners in the region that are using it. The big changes really are we went up about $1 million in terms of revenues and recoveries for this budget. The largest items being some new funding that's come online. So the first one to highlight would be a program called No Hate in Halton, which is just under $400,000 of budget impact for 2023. We also have the community safety and policing funding. That level of funding has gone up almost $500,000. And then in terms of the secondments that I mentioned before, we've had in the last couple of years a couple officers go on international deployments. So that's increasing our level of secondment revenue by another couple $100,000. So those are the main sources of the recoveries and revenue.
So just for clarification for anybody from the public that's watching, fines, traffic tickets, all those sorts of things, none of that money comes to the police department? No. Okay, that's their police service. That's an important point. I think the public should always recognize that those revenues go to the municipalities and to the province, right? Okay.
And sometimes when we call it revenue in some of those common areas, it's a bit misleading. It really is recovery. It's even recovery for salary dollars spent when we do criminal records checks, because we're only able to charge a reasonable amount based on the staff time that's absorbed there. So you saw one of the internationally deployed officers last night who was home to be at the swearing in of his second daughter. But when he's away, we can replace him so that we're not running that officer short here. The money's just coming in to pay for his salary while he's away. Similar to the OPC secondments and some of our JFO work that we're doing. So it really is recovery as opposed to revenue and making money. But we have been very fortunate in some of the other grant areas that Greg mentioned at the end there. Every once in a while, the province will come out through the Solicitor General's office, sometimes with more than 2 days' notice, to say that they're taking applications for a grant program, and we fill in the forms. We have Keith Moore and people in community safety, community mobilization, and others who apply for these grants, and we have been successful in a number of those initiatives, which show as revenue, and they will be consumed in delivering those programs as we outlined in those grant applications. So, thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to get those points of clarification out. I'm going to ask my board colleagues for questions now. Who wants to start? Kurt, you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Chief and Deputy Chiefs and others, staff, for all of the work that has gone into the material that we've seen now a couple of times. I'm probably going to be a minute or two in terms of my questions, so I ask for you to bear with me. I don't disagree fundamentally with anything that you've said this morning. I understand the population, police officer issues. I understand the traffic issues, although I think some communities have looked to technology to address some of the traffic issues, probably. It might be time that Halton take a lead in some of that. What I don't understand in the presentation is what the anticipated impact on crime, on public safety and community safety is as a result of the request. That's, I don't understand that. I see in the presentation we're addressing emerging trends. I think I know what some of those trends are, but I'd like to know what the service thinks some of those trends are that are going to be addressed. but I'd also like to have some information or an understanding of what some of the anticipated outcomes might be from that. And I think the community would like to probably understand some of that. And can you try and answer that somewhat?
Certainly, I mean, through the chair, there's a number of issues that we know that will be trends. Traffic is just one that I was attempting to highlight in relation to the frontline officers. I strongly believe that, to your other point, each of our municipalities, not the region, but each of our municipalities should be investing in photo radar. They should be investing in more technology when it comes to red light cameras for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, for traffic safety. Secondly, to hopefully remove police from doing as much enforcement. Thirdly, taking some of the criticism that our officers get from the community, because when they get stopped and get a ticket, they're not happy. That's one of the major differences between policemen and firefighters, is sometimes the interactions by the very nature are negative. So I've said, I think for the last 5 years at Regional Council, or ever since the province made it available to municipalities, you should have photo radar. But we also have organized crime trends. We have high-level organized criminals living and operating here in Halton. Certainly there's the impact of cybercrime, money laundering just being one example. Any one of us could potentially fall prey to that, even through some innocent online activities. So those sorts of things, when we look at the cyber part, we look at our cybersecurity unit, the cybercrime unit, we look at the impact of having to change a little bit of this building, and Jeff could certainly speak to those 4 specialist sorts of positions and the need. I would say we need more officers in some of those positions that are not included in this budget when it comes to, Deputy Hill and I had some discussions around human trafficking. We have a full-time human trafficking unit right now, which is very busy, unfortunately, and it is something that is horrendous situations that are happening all across Halton and all across, especially the GTA and QEW 401 corridors. We could have a second human trafficking unit and they would be busy full-time. Where do we get those resources from? We can't take them from the front line, which are already at what we feel is a minimum. And we don't technically have minimums here contractually. That may be a bargaining issue, but we've never had minimums in the contract. Some services do. But we don't have the ability to take a substantial number of officers away from the front line to put them into a second human trafficking unit or a third drug enforcement unit. So we do a lot of it with sort of mutual aid between our special units, intelligence certainly supporting a lot of the activities of human trafficking. And just a couple of years ago, we made the decision, maybe before, Mr. Allen, you were on the board or around that time, to commit to a full second professional surveillance unit. They've been so busy, and they are often the unit which puts the real evidence for the serious cases together, because increasingly, another trend on the technology side, everything's pretty much going encrypted and dark, and there are all sorts of policing issues to the interception of communications on hardened devices. So other techniques become increasingly important when it comes to putting some of those criminals into our courts. So we have, we have those drug and human trafficking issues and criminal organization issues. The organized crime aspect of vehicle theft. This wasn't 1,200 kids stealing vehicles for joyriding like it might have been in the 80s. These are highly organized, or people who are paid by organized crime to target and steal certain vehicles for export to Europe or Africa, probably in a cargo container in Montreal within 24 or 48 hours. Once in a while, through good police work, we recover a couple hundred of them. But what's the impact even of that 17 million? The insurance companies have probably paid out. Someone else is going to sell those vehicles, and the manufacturers are going to sell another brand new Lexus or F-150, and that's why I think that needs to change on the manufacturing side. People have a lot of expectations of our frontline officers when it comes to not just their approach to every situation, and we have a very professional group of officers working here. I think it's mirrored every year in the relatively low number of public complaints and things that we have, but people also want to see officers. I can't say that the trend is people want more Halton police officers, but we need to have more officers out there doing what frontline officers do. Even the positive interactions that have nothing to do with Highway Traffic Act enforcement or criminal organizations. It's the wellness aspect, the community mobilization, engaging with the community. It's difficult for me to say that every single officer that we have is going to make an important difference when it comes to that. But Raj, Jeff, you have...
If I could just speak to the four specialist positions are specific to really technology. And as we see organized crime, infiltrating even more, as we see our stats, rising in that area. I mean, from 2018, we had 5 shootings. This year, we had 16. Comparatively speaking to the services that border us, it's not a high number compared to them, but for us, it's an unacceptable number. But it shows how it's starting to seep in. And the 4 positions that we have asked for, one is to run our computer crime unit specifically. When we merge these people together to make sure that we can deal with technology, that we can deal with all the things that are happening on the dark web, cybersecurity in the sense of attacks. The other position is an investigator, a specialist for that. The other position, and I can go more into it in camera, is for a technologist for our covert operations that we do. The impact is going to be we have to stay on top of these trends, and if we don't have the skills and the abilities in-house to deal with these and investigate these, we're going to fall behind, and you're going to see the negative impact that we're not going to be capable of doing some of these crimes. So we have to stay on top of this. We have to have the latest technology. We have to have, even in that unit, we have to have the latest software to be able to do this, because the technology, if you look at what our cyber investigators are doing now, I can tell you that they're involved in almost all of our most significant investigations now, because that's where a lot of the evidence now is online, it's on the internet, it's in the dark web. If we don't have that capability, it's going to be a big issue for us. So the impact for what the community is going to be is the knowledge that as crime becomes more complicated, as organized crime becomes more complicated, that we're going to be able to be capable to deal with it. That they're going to see us, as we see with like we've talked about our homicides and the background of some of those homicides. We have to investigate those as hard as we possibly can every single time. We can never let go, and we can never sit back on our heels because we have to make sure that everybody knows that these are the most complicated crimes that we deal with, and we have to have that capability. So that's the impact, is basically having that capability to deal with those crimes and staying in touch with where technology is going. And that's why we've made such a significant investment into the computer crime unit, and that we're bringing all these people together. And the renovations that we're asking for are surrounding completely having our 12 people in there in a room that's together, so they have the technologies available, so that we can operate and be the finest that we're at.
So just to follow up, if I may, is there a plan to further bolster the specialized units? You've touched on 1 or 2 of them, but there are others. And as I said, I understand the front line. But I think the only way that the burden is lessened somewhat on the front line is when things are solved and some of the running stops. And that's kind of what I'm looking for is there a plan to bolster the specialized units in some way? You talked about 4 cyber Is that enough? Talk about surveillance, one surveillance team, is that enough? Because I think I heard you say, Chief, that they're really doing a lot of work, and having a lot of success.
If I could just add, when it relates to the front line, a lot of that cyber work we do for the front line. And so instead of having somebody, a frontline officer, trying to do it on their own, the requests are coming into our specialists, and their specialists can write production orders. They can do the research. They actually prepare a package that they can give back to the frontline investigators if that's what it be. When the chief talked about, the challenge becomes when the chief talked about human trafficking, I can tell you that this year our human traffic investigators doubled their stats from last year. So I know that they, in their minds, and you know, I wouldn't disagree, could easily justify, in my mind, having another team. And that's where the challenge becomes, though, is when we try and stay within the numbers that we're trying to stay within, where do we put all of our eggs? For us right now this year, it's the computer crime area because it's an area we know we're behind on. And that's why we're going there, putting all of our eggs in that basket at the moment. But to your point, we're going to have to continuously invest in those areas because those are the areas that are growing. And you know, a couple more years of, you know, heaven forbid we doubled those numbers again. It just shows that we're infiltrating the areas that we are. Doesn't mean that the crime hasn't always been there. It just means we're getting better at catching it, being proactive on it, and doing something about it. It's the same that we've talked about. You've heard us talk about the ICE presentations, which is our internet child exploitation. I could put 10 people in that unit, and they would be busy every single day. And that's an unfortunate commentary. But it's us trying to prioritize where we put those resources.
Raj? To the chair, one thing I will add is that you know, we don't always build in growth and diversification of investigative units with a budget. We may use in-kind resources. So as we add these 16 bodies, it's not lost on us. These 16 bodies will be seconded to the homicides that happen because they need people to do some of the grunt work. And so they're not doing that work. So they're participating in those areas. When we expanded intimate partner violence, we grabbed 16 officers, and only half came from budget. There came from our existing resources. So we're always thinking differently on how we want to deploy, how we want to address these crime trends, and how we get ahead of the curve. But a lot of that comes from our frontline staffing. And it becomes a fine balance of ensuring that we have the right amount of people on the road for their safety and well-being, as well as call response and efficiencies, but also using their skill sets to second them. So the chief sent you an email the other day about Project Touchdown. Well, we seconded members of those organizations to be part of that joint forces operations. And so when we do that, we have to backfill in our front line, become those backfills in those investigative units here because we still have to do business here. So this doesn't just reflect a frontline centric, this is what you're going to do. Those 16 new bodies will be doing that work. 16 existing bodies will be seconded internally to support those crime-based trends and priorities that we have as an organization. So that's an important piece for the board to understand.
And there might be a couple of comments in camera on how we are flexible in having some more resources in some of those special areas. Surveillance is a very important one, and the ability to second people and give them opportunities. We really find often when we want to give somebody an opportunity to work in a detective office or an intelligence office for a month or two, the people on the front line, platoons and things, cannot let them go. We want to build in that because people need to have some of those experiences, find out if that's what they really want to do. But that's not the be all and end all of budgets. And then we have some issues again for in camera when it comes to our involvement sometimes in joint force operations and what can happen as a result of other organizations' activities. I'll leave that for in camera.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to make a comment in terms of joint force operations. I think it's great work when we learn that 15 or 200 cars have been recovered. And I take very seriously the comments that you made about manufacturers needing to do their part of the job and make sure that vehicles aren't as easily stolen as they are. I do think, though, that until policing in general, I'm not talking about Halton necessarily, But if hundreds or thousands of cars are going to the Port of Montreal, then surely to stop that, it's going to take a massive effort involving, whoever, Montreal, Sûreté du Québec, RCMP, until the heads of the organizations are taken out of commission. All we're doing, I think, is charging the runners. And, I know that's not something that you can do alone, but, I think we need a much more sophisticated approach to crime on the long term. I'll pass, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Good questions? Navneet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I have is regarding components of the budget with respect to the new components, for example, the staffing increase, the district funding, cybersecurity. The only thing I fail to see in this budget is the specificity around programs that you're mentioning. So I think I understand maybe perhaps here in this forum we may not be able to discuss that, but I think we as a board would like to see, or definitely myself, is a lot more detail around, okay, for example, if we're looking for this many people, then X number of people are going to be, involved in this program, which is going to reduce the crime in this way, and therefore this is the cost. So sort of looking at that kind of specificity. And so I'm wondering if that's something that has already been done to derive at these numbers.
Well, a lot of these numbers come from need that's identified by the people that are actually in those units. So you'll have the detective sergeant in charge of intelligence or drugs saying, oh my God, I need 5 more people. Can I put them in the budget this year? And they can't. Or you'll have the frontline people or the district commanders saying, we need more people on the platoons. We need 32 people, and when we pare that down to 16, we think 1 per platoon is reasonable for this year. We don't think we can ask for 32, even though you may be able to justify that need at the front line. We do try to do what we can we have a very good relationship with the region. We also appreciate the fact that, to a degree, the region comes and says, we would like you to stay at 4.7. It's not like Toronto City Council saying, we'd like you to stay at 0. How many people are you going to lay off? But they're already 500 or 600 officers short in Toronto, so that's not going to happen either. So we try to reach that level of reasonableness, and this is what we absolutely need as opposed to what we would like. I would love to have another 4 people in a full-time human trafficking unit. But, for another percent would hire another 15 or 16 officers, and we could do all sorts of things, but then the budget would be at 6.7. And we would say, with these 4 officers, we're probably going to lay another 50 human trafficking charges and save another 7 or 8 victims that are in human trafficking.
Exactly.
And everybody would say, that's great, let's do it. But we also have to look after our frontline people that are out there working 24 hours a day, feeling that they're understaffed, and us not necessarily disagreeing. So we try to address some of that through overtime. We haven't really talked about overtime. We typically under budget what we know our overtime costs will be, because we know we can absorb the overtime costs and still have a reasonable budget surplus, as we do again this year, which we need for the capital programs. So sometimes we can fill in, when we say hypothetically, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights might be busier than some other times, and we're short-staffed. We can call an officer in on overtime. We can pay that officer time and a half for Friday and Saturday night. It's still cheaper than having another full-time officer. But we're getting to the point where people don't want to work anymore. They don't want to work extra hours. They maybe want to come in do a 12-hour pay duty because they're sitting in a car at a third line in Spears Road because the traffic lights are being changed. They don't want to come in and work a Friday night and give that night up with their family. So it's a sense of some of the workload at the front line and also somewhat changing generations. Where probably many years ago, people would have said, 10 hours overtime, I'll be there, just call me every day. A lot of people don't do that anymore. So we do have shifts that run far shorter than our supervisors feel comfortable with. We call people in on overtime. But again, that's becoming increasingly difficult to get people to come back to work on their days off because it's legitimate for good reasons, mental health and otherwise, work-life balance. I did my 2 days, my 2 nights. My next 4 days are mine with my family and kids, and I don't want to come back in. Now, once in a while, if things are really serious, we can make people come into work. Our detectives tend to come into work more often. Certainly our homicide and intelligence people are always at the ready in our surveillance units, and that's a little different animal. But it becomes increasingly difficult. But we also don't want to, I will never fully budget for what I think overtime is going to be, because it would mean I could hire probably 10 less people rather than absorbing the difference. So we absorb that difference as we do year after year. The other thing that we can do, and the board has, over the past 10 years, I've been very supportive of our staffing levels to the point where we certainly have authorized strength numbers, which are in the budget. I have always been given the ability or the authority to hire over our staffing numbers, but it's also my responsibility to try to come in within the budget. If we wanted to, hypothetically, looking into next year, wanted to try to address a certain type of crime, and if we could even hire enough people to do it, I could go over budget on some staffing things above and beyond what we're talking about here today and absorb that overage in other areas during the year, and that would be okay too. So there might be some ways that we can address something like human trafficking, not necessarily in 2023, maybe in another year, pilot project, whatever we call it. But I think it's an important sign of the times, Nav, when we're seeing where people are, at least in their minds or in their families' minds, they're overworked, they're tired. And so that overtime situation, I tell you, in my first 10 years of policing, I would have come in and worked overtime any day. Might not be the smartest thing, but that's the way it was. That's not the way it is now. So that's another reason that we want to try to add staff which are visible to our frontline people and working with them at those levels. And as Roger said, it also gives maybe a little bit of flexibility once in a while. There's different times of the years where we have more people working than others. Obviously, there's peak vacation times. There's different things where we can look at where some of our platoons are staffed a little better. February, March, maybe, that sort of thing, where we might be able to look at the common opportunities when our resources are a little bit higher. But by and large, it's any given day, our frontline people are looking at whether there's, in their view, enough people there to work that day shift or that night shift.
I think I want to clarify that, for example, you mentioned reduced sources of crime and community safety wellbeing plan. So what we're looking for is the specificity around which crimes are you going to be reducing. Whether it's the request for new resources or existing resources. So I think it's not a question of whether resources can be approved or not. It's just how the request is aligned with the actual programs and initiatives. that we can see with metrics how it's going to be, ascertained at the end of the year. Oh, okay, for example, we attended or we addressed this issue with X number of resources, and therefore the result was this, and this is what we got actually. So I think the effectiveness of the resources need to be looked at, and then at this stage with the budget, we're looking at, more specificity, and it may not be in this forum that we discuss, but I think in camera.
Yeah, the tricky part is it's easy to look at a project like Project Takedown and say, we spent 2,000 hours of Halton Fleet time as a member of that joint force unit. And look, we found 200 cars, charged 50 people, $17 million, and it sounds good. That's much harder to do at the front line of each uniformed patrol officer who's out there, who really are bread and butter, is an old expression, but they really are the core of what we do is the front line. The intake of all the calls, dealing just like our dispatchers and our frontline platoon officers most often deal with the beginning of all of these situations. It's a lot easier to say, we spent 30,000 hours on a homicide and we were able to solve it. We can do those things. We can break down what every officer does. We know that from monthly performance goals and statistics that we have. We can show you what those frontline people do. When you talk a little more, and it's probably a good board retreat sort of discussion, when you talk about the community safety well-being and that whole hope of having impact upstream and preventing crime, then you're talking about getting into some of the mental health and drug issues and trying to prevent people from getting into a situation where they are preventing crime. With inflation and COVID and loss of employment and any number of other things that have happened in the last couple of years, retail thefts are very high. Some of it's organized, like we heard about from the alternate response unit and the millions of dollars that were being stolen from Shoppers Drug Mart, Walmart, sorts of things in recent months. And other times it's people stealing groceries. So that frontline officer is not going to stop that person who doesn't have enough money for food to feed the kids. Maybe through some of the CSWB work and some of the homelessness work and providing affordable housing. There's very good programs through the region where we're probably better positioned than most. We do have some homeless people in Halton. I've personally stopped and talked to some of them. I know in Burlington you've been experiencing some. One or two or three for some of our citizens is a lot compared to Hamilton, Toronto, and it was just on the east side of Vancouver. There's a large tent city in the region of Waterloo. Thankfully, we don't have those sorts of things yet, but who knows when they can start to pop up, and some of it's been around Burlington City Hall even. So some of that CSWB stuff, we all strongly think that's the way that we need to try to have that upstream impact. Measuring what that impact is, we may find affordable housing for 100 people, and another 200 people may come here that need affordable housing, and it's going to look like more people are homeless or out of houses. So was it a success or wasn't it? Those are the sorts of things that it's at the front line. We will look at any number of ways that we can analyze this and share it with you, and I appreciate the question of where it's coming from. But it is very difficult. And, you could have, we could have implemented drug reduction and drug awareness programs 5 or 6 years ago, and before fentanyl got here, and fentanyl arrives on the scene and it looks like the programs fail. It's changes. It's like fentanyl is just an epidemic on its own. And so when you have crime reduction programs or crime prevention programs, or you try to educate your citizens to, look, almost every house has a double garage, why don't you put your car inside it? It's a novel idea, but they're all used for storage. So the cars are sitting in the driveway and the fob's inside the front door, and I shouldn't be surprised when someone's able to access that. These days, people should know. But it doesn't mean because organized crime has latched onto this and stolen 1,200, not all of the 1,200 cars this year, but organized crime maybe has stolen 600 of them. The best anti-auto theft program is not going to stop that profitable business. So you might say, oh, you had this auto theft program, education program, obviously failed because this happened. And it's not really a correlation. So we will work at a number of different statistics to help explain what all of the officers do, sort of that value for investment. But it's difficult on the, crime increase trends or decrease trends. OxyContin changed when the manufacturers changed OxyContin, but fentanyl is coming from completely different sources.
Did I see you had your hand up? Okay, Lisa, then Fred.
Thank you very much through the chair to the deputies. Just want to build on that question there. So what I'm hearing is that it is, of course, a very dynamic and complex approach to policing in our communities as the denominators continually change. We heard about a variety of different business units that are experiencing some internal and external changes that are driving up or down crime statistics. What I think is helpful to the board would be when we're reviewing this budget and the overview, it may be a little too sky-high level. And in order to add that commentary around putting a qualitative piece to the quantitative piece, I think that may be some of the additional supplementary information that the board could be looking for, could be finding very valuable. So when we need to go back out and to defend this budget to regional council, to our communities that we serve, those pieces are very important. So I know we get our community happenings, those are great, but I think it's that strategic piece that is inside and outside of the up to 2023 strategic plan that we're looking for these business cases or business approaches to how the investment is changing. And we heard an example from yourself saying, if we add this many, we could reduce this, lay this many charges, and possibly save this many victims. So hearing that in the context of the investment and the return on that investment makes it very helpful to carry out and be discharged with our own duties. Do you have any thoughts to further share on that?
I think to try and answer the question specifically, we do keep stats like that. So using the example of human trafficking, you wouldn't have had the benefit of seeing the presentation yet, but we did do a presentation when human trafficking came, and they spoke specifically about, here's how many interventions we had, which is obviously a basis of the program that they run. Here's how many charges, here's how many people we saved. So when we speak specifically about special units, which is what I think you were speaking to, we do keep those stats, and we can produce those. We can say, so for example, the reason I know the HT stat is because it's year end. So it's the end of the year, here's what we've accomplished, here's how many people we dealt with, here's how many interactions or interventions that we attempted, here's how many victims we saved, we have all those numbers. And, when we do these presentations for the board, that is part of it, is to educate the public and to say, here's all the things we're doing. This is what you asked us to do. And when we talk about the qualitative, how many people you have and what are you getting out of it? Well, for the HT unit, I'd say I've got 5 people, and here's what I just did. I laid 185 charges. We saved this many victims. We interacted this many people. We had this many contacts. We made this many community partnerships, which is a huge part of it. And we can lay that all out for you, no problem. And that is the return on the investment that you get on that specific investment that we've already made. So to the same point, when I talked about the internet child exploitation, I could say the same thing because we have those stats as well. Here's how many interventions, here's how many files we ran, here's how many people we had contact. So we can definitely do that. That isn't an issue, and you'll see us continuously, and for the members of the board that have been here before, you've seen those presentations where we will do that. So that's not a problem. It's part of that education. So when we talk about, to your point of, well, what am I going to get for this? It's going to be, that's how the proof's going to be in the pudding. I got these extra people, and here's the numbers that we produced, here's the community partnerships we developed, here's the capability, and here's how even to the point of the numerical point is this is what we got out of it, and this is how it affects the community, and this is what the, how we're strengthened. So I think if that's specifically what you're asking, we can do that. That's not an issue. Whether we would do it here in the budget, I don't know if we would do it to that specificity, because, I mean, in regional investigative unit alone, we've got a lot of specialized units. I could turn that into a three-day presentation easily, which I would happily do, because I love bragging about them. But along the year as we go, I think you're going to see that we continuously are doing that. We're trying to do that.
Thank you very much. Just to change gears into a bit of a different question, of course, through the chair. So we did have some discussion around the revenue and recoveries and how that amount breaks out, but we also heard from the chief that there were enhanced efficiencies that were identified in this last year of services. Are they in this budget, or can they be reported back out? So do you do in-year in-house savings reports?
Well, so one of the things through the chair that I comment on was like electronic notes. That's the sort of thing you're referring to. So we invest in electronic notes. All of our frontline officers now utilize electronic notes where they can dictate, do things on computers and phones. There are no, well, there's going to be some for different reasons, hard notebooks that people are writing in. A lot of technological advantages to having the electronic notes on devices, which should save time from the officer sitting in a car and trying to write out reports, handwriting out reports, or typing on mobile workstations. So those efficiencies should result in those officers being able to, okay, I've done that call, let's get on to the next one. But that's a hard one to analyze the savings, right, Bill?
Yes, Chief, through the chair. Other efficiencies come from that as well. So previously, paper notes, for example, you'd have to scan them. And so somebody's sitting at a scanner, a frontline officer sitting at a scanner, scanning their notes, and it goes to another group where it has to be, collated and all this stuff. So now that it's electronic, it flows right through. So there's actually savings downstream as well in administration.
And some of the other investments, and I think you had an opportunity this week to sit in the communications area for a little while, where we have GPS on all of our vehicles and GPS on our frontline portables, so that if someone's stopped somebody and it's a foot pursuit, we even have officer safety covered to a higher degree now because we know where that officer is. That also leads to some efficiencies. It's not cost savings. But if that dispatcher is sitting there and says, well, I was going to send Constable Knoll to this call, but Constable Costanen is 10 kilometers closer, that just happens seamlessly now. Both officers are working, so you're not saving money, but you're saving time, which might be important. Saving response time, which might be important to the citizens. Let's say, oh, it's so nice you were here in 2 minutes instead of 20 minutes in traffic, or an hour. So there are efficiencies that aren't necessarily cost savings on the operational side, and that's technology which at the same time is keeping our officers safer. Or if you have a major response and supervisors and communications they're phenomenal people in there, can coordinate the response of the vehicles because they know where everyone is. If you're working and you're responding to the armed robbery, you don't know where your fellow officers are necessarily unless you're talking on the radio. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. This is real-time technology which shows us where those people are, which is critical. And it's critical when the most serious situation happens. Even our recent police-related shooting, there would be technological evidence of where those officers physically were at that point in time, not just where they said they were, which is very helpful. So there's a lot of technology which is expensive, but it has a value in that example, on the officer safety side and on the evidentiary side, potentially, which would be very hard to put a value on.
I think using Constable Knoll and foot chase in the same sentence is kind of pointless.
Well, it's because the person got away and
Yeah.
Constable Constantine had to help.
Constable probably would be able to be a little more efficient, even if he was 100 kilometers away from that particular.
He had GPS.
Yeah, exactly.
He would use
You had some comments, Constable Constantine? I think that's a demotion for you.
That would be honored to be a police officer, not in my, space. So, I want to build on the comments that we've heard so far. So I'm just going to preface this by, I don't think the board is interested in what every individual frontline officer is doing. They're more interested in what the totality of over 1,000 persons is going to do. And I think the board's more interested in a proactive approach to return on investment than a reactive approach. We heard in a confidential session an excellent risk profile plan, proactive plan from the tech guys. How they were going to reduce the risk profile in certain areas using technology, which is in itself a return on investment type thing. So I think the question is, given the totality of the service and the roughly $150 million budget, what outcomes are you going to achieve, especially in terms of the crimes trends you've identified: auto theft, cybercrime, organized crime, human trafficking, hate crime, and traffic in general. And you can take that in terms of risk reduction, crime reduction, or reduction in victimization. That's what the board wants to see, to highlight what it's spending the community's money on. I think that's the piece that will take us from a reactive positioning to a proactive one. You hit on it with the human trafficking, as I know, and that was the example off the top of your head, but you're not far off the idea. And Jeff, you talked about reactive, and we've heard risk. Roger talked about risk tons of times. So it's just about putting those pieces together so that there's a clear a clear plan, and that's the rationale for the investment. It's very, very close.
If I could just, because you've used that example, when I speak about the stats, hoping that you're not just catching up on the fact I talked about charges. Charges are only one part.
No.
When I talk about statistics, I'm talking about all the preventative work, trafficking. Most of it is all proactive preventative work, and we do keep those stats, and we can talk about how much hours we've put into risk mitigation, proactively building communication.
You're doing proactive policing.
Right.
Now we want some proactive planning, and then we want proactive, especially in terms of, in this particular case, the financial, mirroring the operational planning with the financial planning. Does this make sense?
I think that's all built into it, though. I think it's.
Go back,
I think if I may, I think you hit on it when you were giving a couple of examples. I think the board should get a picture of crime. What's an acceptable level? There's no acceptable level for crime, but X additional human resources we hope to achieve this with. And I don't, and a couple of examples, human trafficking, and Jeff, you had a couple of examples where you say, that's all done in the background, but we don't see it. We don't see it, or at least I don't see it.
So let me add one more piece to this to make it even more complex, or hopefully less complex. Deputy Hill, you mentioned that you have all these metrics, and I know you do because I've seen them pulled out to justify different business cases throughout the year. I think if instead of only presenting them during specific presentations, those statistics could be then applied to the budgetary increase requests or the budgetary requests. So, for example, without getting into specifics, if it was done in camera, your staff did an amazing job of presenting to us the risks and costs of cybersecurity, and we could actually see an investment and return in that presentation. If that can then be added to, for example, if you look at your costs, your justification of the 5.7%, if you could say, if you could drill down to say cybersecurity costs 0.4%, and for that, these are going to be, I know you can't in that one, that's a bad example because you can't publicly talk about that, but if you could take that category and say, for that, the community is going to get X, Y, and Z, based on the statistics that you're already keeping. But to extrapolate them in connection directly with the budget, that is, I think, the way that we can justify to the folks that are writing the checks as to what that investment in those services means to them. Because right now it's all very open, and just trust me, I'm going to spend the money as and we're going to do the best we possibly can. If you can connect them to the statistics, even if they're not necessarily, even if they're if you use a crass term, a wild ass guesses as to what that's going to look like based on past experience, then I think that's very helpful in justifying those additional costs. So take the information you're already presenting us, again, cyber security, and build that into the budget process. So when the budget's being presented to us, we have the justification, and then when the chief and I have to go to regional council later and do it, then again, to the regional council, we can use those same justification points.
I think,
did that summarize it reasonably well, or am I getting it? Okay.
I think the area where it becomes more difficult is when we're talking about the uniformed frontline patrol officer. We can all justify our homicide detectives and investigators and our human trafficking unit and what the issues are. But throughout the region, 24 hours a day, things are happening. And we have to have enough staff there, not that are always going to be there to prevent an auto theft or to investigate a human trafficking case, but there has to be some level of resourcing because things are going to happen and the officers are going to have enough people there to be safe, even above and beyond what each of those officers do. I mean, we can break down by 300 frontline uniform officers what they do, and there can be a lot of statistics, and that's going to increase if there's more of them. There's going to be more workload because of the increased population and different things and complexities that we've talked about. But there's also that reality of policing. Let me maybe use an unfair comparison. We need to have 40 firefighters working 24 hours a day in the town of Oakville. Because there might be a fire, there might be a really bad car accident, someone has to be extricated, and that might not happen. But you still need to have them there. And if you tried to legitimize, and I do this with all respect to our firefighters, they do some horrendous jobs in terrible situations. But if you were to say, here's what we got for this investment, we need 10 more firefighters, what did they do? They might do some fire prevention, fire alarm inspection stuff, because that's a business that they do sort of when they have time. But if you look at the cost per fire or the cost per extrication on the 401, which might be charged back anyway, we don't legitimize those things. The cost per paramedic, or how many people is a paramedic going to take to the hospital? They're going to take as many people as they get called to that day, and they're going to get them to the hospital in the best way they can. So on the frontline side, I mean, our frontline people are going to be doing traffic enforcement. They're going to be doing education. They're going to be mentoring youth in the schools. They're going to be doing all those things, and we can break down some of it. But we also need them there when that call, when that accident happens, or it doesn't happen, they still have to be there. And I don't remember years and years ago, we used to argue from the association side that we needed more people, and the chief would say, we can't plan for the day that the airplane crashes on its way into Pearson. There's some things you could never plan to have enough resources for. But you do know what goes on a daily basis and what you reasonably should have there. That's sort of the frontline policing model at the uniform level. So it's a difficult way to think about every police officer and how does each one of our frontline patrol officers be legitimized from a cost perspective. Because I can tell you at midnight or 1 o'clock on a Friday morning, if there might be 20 names on a roster and it's the middle of summer and X number on holidays and a couple of people are sick and someone's off with some sort of a legitimate absence and someone books sick, there is a minimum number of people there. So there's a part where we can break down all those statistics. We'd be glad to do them, and average workload and what we think officers will do. There's also a part where we need to make sure there's enough people there at midnight on a Friday night that the officers are safe and they can respond to, an armed robbery and it's happening more and more where 3 or 4 young people, sometimes with a gun or not, sometimes a real gun, sometimes not, don't know the difference. You need more than 2 officers to go to that robbery where 4 people just jumped over the counter at the pharmacy, right? So there is that little bit of a quality, maybe as Ms. Kern says, as opposed to quantity, that you need to have a certain number to do things. And it's very easily legitimized because of some contractual issues and some legislative issues on some other emergency services sides, and it's not done here. But I can assure you, we do not have more people than we need. And we could use more people than what is in this budget. And I know that's not the point of the questions. The point is to look at what's the value on the return of those dollars. And we'll do more of those analytics. But there is that also minimal staffing piece at the front line that we need to look at. And that's one of my responsibilities as a chief of police, is to make sure that our people have enough people working in their environment. And that's a little bit removed from statistics, but it's something I need to deal with on my end of the business.
When you're dealing with firefighters, you forgot the most key statistic, that's rescuing cats from trees. But in all seriousness, though, I get what you're saying, and I don't think anybody around this table doubts in any way whatsoever that 3 of you and the 990 other people that work below you are requisitioning and utilizing and deploying resources to the best possible ability to keep Halton at that wonderful page of ones or check marks that's high. So there's nobody's questioning that. The issue really is demonstrating to the taxpayer the value proposition for the additional tax. We're already number 1. So if I give you another $1 million, what do we get out of that? So we become better than 1. I guess it's about metrics. So as an example, years ago when I first joined Oakville Council, all the Oakville firefighters, we were picking up firefighters, Dave. I apologize in advance.
Not at all.
The company, you're all wonderful.
Paul, you're great.
Yeah, Paul, you're fantastic. We love you all. But when they were coming to council trying to justify, they wanted to go from 2 to 3 people on a truck. And that was a big deal at the time. I remember, I was literally, after you get sworn in, I remember that was they were on me hourly about this issue, and it was an important issue. But they were able to demonstrate with real statistics what that meant to the public. It meant time, ability to be able to respond. It talked about, time to, in their case, how much quicker they could deploy the hoses. Whatever the case was, they had a whole list of metrics that they were able to demonstrate what the value proposition was. And frankly, that won it at the end of the day. They talked about, turnout rate. They talked about the ability to be able to suppress fire more rapidly. They talked about being able to extricate people from cars more expeditiously, et cetera. And that won at the end of the day, because up to then, it was just simply, was this just an exercise to employ more firefighters, or was it legitimate? I think that when you say you have 20 more officers, and yeah, I know that they get seconded in all different areas, and if there's a murder or something extremely significant happening, you're going to be deploying a whole whack of folks to be involved in an investigation, whether it's the Joe jobs or the serious investigative work. But if you have 20 new officers, what does that mean in terms of, because for the most part, they're on platoons and they're doing calls. What does it mean in terms of, for example, only one example, what's the response rate like? Can you demonstrate that with more officers on a platoon, can you respond more rapidly to a call when there's a retail theft or a break-in or something like that? So I think it's these sort of metrics that would be very useful for the public to understand the value. We did this with ambulances fairly recently. We've been dealing with what's the response rate for ambulances based on the CAC chart, and it was or CTAS, whatever the term, I can't, my acronyms, I don't have my acronyms. I think it's CTAS Center. Pardon me?
It is the CAC
Center, but CTAS, I think, is the acuity scale. But cardiac being the top of the chain. But they were able to demonstrate to us, why their rates were at this level, and more vehicles would mean this, and more paramedics would mean that. And it was a very good argument. So I think that what we're asking for is to be able to take that information and turn into that. So, if we invest this much more in cybersecurity costs, what is the likelihood of reducing, a cyber incident, police department? If we put 20 more officers on the street, what is the turnout rate? What is, not turnout rate, but the response rate? How many more calls can a platoon manage in a period of time? I think it's those statistics that we would like to be able to see to demonstrate that the taxpayers are getting value for dollar. I have zero doubt that they are. I'm already sold that we do a great job. You do a great job. But I think in order to justify these budget increases for the owners of the budget, which is us ultimately, we have to defend it to the public and to the council. We need to have that information, because we need to be able to not just trust, but verify, to use Ronald Reagan's famous term in the 1980s dealing with the fall of the Soviet Union. We trust you, but we need to verify, and we need to be able to demonstrate to the public that they're getting good value for dollar. So if we can take those statistics that Deputy Hill was talking about, and even use some of the baseline numbers that you've created over the years to say X equals Y, and demonstrate that in conjunction with the budget, that makes it an easier sell to the public. And that they get to understand that this isn't just, a natural annual increase that just happens by the natural order of things, that it's actually weighted by certain, principles, and not principles, but certain cost drivers and certain value adds to the service and to their expectations of what the phenomenal services that you do offer now. So I think I'm hoping that gives a bit of a sense of what we're looking for, and that perhaps the computer geniuses in the service can find a way to extrapolate that information to link up with the budget going forward. Does that help members of the board? Are we getting?
I would just add that it doesn't have to be numbers driven or stats driven.
Exactly.
The risk profile that we saw in the cybersecurity investments was not.
That's right.
That's right. You're right. It wasn't quantitative, but there was a risk assessment process that was used.
I apologize.
Which is a great way.
Yeah.
And I also think that when I listed off those 6 high trending areas that I mentioned, 7th one is maintenance of the status quo, which is also like not to fall behind on general safety in the community or whatever. In the Army, what we call force protection. You have to maintain that too. We can't forget about that, right? As you know.
Yeah, that status quo is probably equally as important as justifying an increase, because everyone wants to know that we're not going backwards. And I apologize if I made it sound more about numbers, but the narrative is equally as important. For example, call-out times, et cetera, the ability to be able to do X, Y, or Z. So thank you for that very important
But just to add to that, through the chair, that's really what this is about, is status quo. This is keeping the level of staffing. We're not increasing the level of staffing compared to our population and compared to our workload. We're increasing it, just as other departments might, but we need this to stay where we are and not to go lower on our staffing. We're not going up into more police officers per capita. I know that was what your comment was going to be, Greg.
I was just going to add that when I look at the overall budget increase for the service, if we look at it in terms of discretionary spending versus things that we have to do to just keep the status quo, when I look at it, I can identify about 30% of the increase you might be able to say is discretionary spending. And of that 30%, the vast majority, 95% of that, is the two items we've been talking about in terms of the expand staffing or the cybersecurity costs. We do a lot of work with our unit managers and go line by line in our budget and try to find savings, try to find efficiencies. But that other 70% of our budget, most of that is the salary increases on all of our officers and the benefit increases. In terms of other small items where we might have some increases that would be discretionary, every year we have maybe some consultants here and there that we'll hire for a specific initiative, so that's something that we could highlight as part of this process. We may have some new software that comes online that has some costs that we can highlight what that software is going to do for us, but generally all of the costs in our budget are for the status quo, and it's how we would be allocating our existing resources.
The environment's not the status quo. We've identified 6 areas where the trends are going up. So there must be some creative adjustments in order to maintain an overall level of safety that is expected by the people living at home.
Yeah, because you can't say it's status quo if our population is continually increasing and technological changes are happening that are creating more crime or that we're having more incursions from outside the community. Status quo is maintaining our safety level, which inherently means that you're going to be increasing your spend on those areas to maintain that status quo. So I think that explanation, the explanation we had earlier, if you can combine all that into something that justifies on a line-by-line basis what these numbers actually mean to the public, then I think we've achieved what we're attempting to do here.
My sort of use of the status quo part was only in relation to staffing numbers for population.
Yeah.
That if we don't at least hire this many, we're going to drop further below those numbers.
And that's an explanation that would be considered part related to that would be related to outcomes. It's a negative outcome. You know, it's demonstrating the cost to maintain the status quo over the cost of not adding the budget. So that becomes a performance metric in and of itself.
Yeah, so reducing police population is not an outcome, right? That's a resource. Yeah. The outcome is what you achieve with those. Yeah. Police population was higher or lower, the same. Yeah. What is being achieved in terms of reduction in crime, reduction in risk, reduction in victimization, for example.
Did I get another HD unit out of that?
Not yet.
No?
Check. Kurt, no, I just have a question, Chair. We were talking about revenue a while ago, and I think the number, how much work is involved to come to a net revenue number? Because the number that, I think the net number may truly be around 60% of what we're talking about. But when we talk about a revenue number that it's more recovery than it is, I think it's a bit misleading in that regard. Is it possible?
So all the recoveries are netted off of all of our expenses. So when we do our funding requests and our overall budget number, that has been reduced by all those recoveries so that it's just the net amount.
I had a different opinion here a while ago.
That's useful to know.
Okay.
Okay, I have a couple of notes. Sorry, did you want? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand go up.
Yes, thank you very much through the chair.
You don't have the blue suit, so it doesn't connect.
I got as close to blue as I could today. Just want to put a finer point on that last conversation, and what it feels like to me is that we need to remove the positions of board and staff and put it more onto process. So what I'm seeing here is actually some process gapping where those definitions and explanations and, you know, the asterisks on is it net revenue or not, the line-by-line savings, we haven't seen that pulled out in this budget. And what it appears to me is that there does need to be a process review of how the budget is prepared and presented. And that, I think, is really at the crux of some of this inquiry today.
Thanks, Lisa. So I have a couple points that I've taken from the conversation and also things that I've just noticed myself. So the first one is, it's on the revenue. When we're in future budgets, and in terms of that revenue, I think first of all, the category of revenue in our summary is inappropriate. I think it'd be better to break it down to cost recoveries, et cetera. And I would appreciate having a breakdown of not just revenue, but I would like to see a budget book. I'm sure you have one. But I mean, if you think of the way that Lisa would recognize this, when we get our budget presentations of the region, we get a full analysis page by page of programs. Now I know some things are in confidence, so you'll have to be presented in confidential session, but I think that the board needs to have a clear understanding of what those budgetary numbers are actually driven by. So I'd like to see going forward a budget book. I don't know if anybody is going to disagree with that or not, but I'm sure there's something in the system now. This is a really good presentation. It's a good overview presentation, but again, if the board is truly going to take ownership of the decisions we make, we really need to understand what drives them. And with that, I think is a better breakdown of revenue and a better categorization of what revenue means. So cost recoveries, et cetera. We learned something today, thank you to Kurt, that they're net recoveries. And it was going to be one of my questions. I was going to ask, when we're talking about recoveries, for example, courtroom security, are those numbers net? Because I know it's an expensive program in courtroom security. What is our bottom line cost? I'd like to know that. You know, what is the cost of courtroom security? What are we recovering? What is our net cost to the region to be doing courtroom security for prisoners from across Ontario and Canada, frankly? So I'd like to know that. If you get us a full copy of the slide deck, I would really appreciate it. Just so that, again, we have all that information in it. And then, of course, the piece around, let's really try to find a way to determine those performance-based metrics that support the increases. And the fourth one is, we talked about last year, we had a workshop last budget cycle for 2022. I'd like to make sure we get back into that this year. So I'd like a workshop. And I think that it would be really good to not just have a workshop around the 2024 budget process, but let's have a workshop around the budgeting process as well, so that we're all on a common ground, so that we all understand how this process works. Because rather than learning things from really good questions, let's get that information all downloaded at the same time, so that we're all on the same page. And those are my points. Is there anything else anybody wants to get a piece of this more, or are we ready to move on with the motion? I think we're ready for motion. So the staff has presented us with a motion that you'll find in the actual report. I'm going to suggest that we add a portion to that. Let me just find it here. Here we go. Talking about some of the things that we have discussed this morning, as well as the need to better understand particularly this year, the extra 1% above the regional guideline. We just want some details before January 6th, and they can be presented in a memo form. And the motion would be, so the motion would be as presented, which is the approval of the budget and the terms that staff have presented in their report, with the add-ons that one, detailed accounts of the plant materials and supplies, expenses, and purchase services. That the chief provide the board by January 6th to the board secretary detailed accounts of the plant materials and supplies expenses and purchase service expenses, and a written explanation of the benefit to the community of the requested increase above the regional guidelines, such as how specific risks will be reduced, how certain crimes will decrease, or how certain victimization will be reduced within this budget. So let's talk about that extra 1%. So that's a narrative or metrics. I'm sorry?
I think it should probably be about the whole budget, because the 1% is actually here now.
Right.
And it's not, it's kind of, last month, 1% was related to additional staffing. This time it's not.
Yeah, I understand. I'm going to suggest that we start with this, because we're talking about, the request is by January 6th.
Yeah.
And we do have a holiday time coming up and everything, and I think this is a good exercise so that we can properly present this to regional council. But I think we need to be, as you're suggesting, getting ready to manage that for the next budget cycle. I think it's a lot to ask between now and January 6th.
100%.
Yeah, okay. So that's the motion that I am suggesting we put on the floor. Would somebody be prepared to move that? Thank you, Nav. Seconded? Nobody? Kurt, thank you very much. Are there further comments or questions on that? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried, thank you. So for the sake of the public, if anybody's watching right now, and I hope there's lots of people in YouTube land watching this, we've just approved the budget request from the service, which will be a 5.7% total budget increase, and it'll be presented to regional council. I don't remember the date. Mr. Secretary?
January 11th.
On January 11th?
Wednesday 11th.
On the 11th of
January
January.
11th.
On January 11th, this will be presented to the regional council for their approval, and they have final say on all matters of finance in the region of Halton. So thank you for everybody's time and attention on this. I know it was a long process to get here. We apologize to the finance staff who've been biting their nails as they've been waiting to be able to press send to the region, but now you have that ability. So thank you for everybody's work on this. Moving on to 4.2, that's the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Who's going to lead us on that? I'll jump at once.
Up to the chair, it's simply an overview of the approval that the board made for the Leave Behind Naloxone program, which is well underway. We've created an environment within our central lockup area where we break down that stigma. We offer naloxone kits to people who want them, and we're happy to say that we've issued probably close to 20 by now. I think the report says 12 by today's date, and we've got 20 kits so far.
They're carrying the vehicles now, correct?
No, because of temperature.
Oh, that's an impact the shelf life.
Yeah. So officers carry them on their person, and then we've got working in partnership with Halton Public Health that we're able to create this distribution program.
And for anybody who's listening, I understand that if you want to have a naloxone kit, not necessarily for your own use, but for public safety, you can request one at any licensed pharmacy in Ontario, I believe is the way. So, and it's not a bad plan. So if you're out and about in the community, or you could encounter somebody that needs your help as a good Samaritan, those naloxone kits are at no cost and no question at your local pharmacy. I recommend everybody gets one. I carry one in my vehicle, which I guess I shouldn't be doing. But I have one in my business and I have one in my home as well, just for emergencies. Anybody have any questions on this?
I'm prepared to move it.
Thank you, Mr. Board Member. All in, seconder, please. Thank you, Lisa. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Black Castle Networks Incorporated Agreement Amendment. This is relatively self-explanatory. Anybody have any questions for staff on this? Kurt?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I know there are 3 or 4, I think in the whole package there's 4 or 5 of these limited tendering requests, and I understand the challenges that can be associated with changing vendors and that kind of thing. What I'm wondering is at times it seems like these go on for a long duration. And really when we say limited tendering, in my language it would be sole sourced. And I'm just wondering if we can get an indication of how long we anticipate that these will go on. I mean, I think some of them, I don't know, but I'm guessing from the material that I have are going to go on for a very long time.
Yeah, through the chair, it's an interesting question because the first one here is to deal with a very highly capable consultant who's been working directly with us throughout the LTE PSBN network project. So that could go on for quite a period of time. It would be difficult to say, here's a 10-year contract and then find you only need them for 2, or similar in the other circumstances. We deal with TELUS for all of our phones. We deal with niche RMS. We have no plans to change niche RMS or Hexagon when it comes to the computer-aided dispatch side of things. But I think technically through our bylaws and budgeting rules that we work under, we need to come back with these. We couldn't tender for someone else to look after niche, other than who does look after niche, unless we were to change that. So it does, I do hear your question on, we come back every year or every 2 years to keep it going because it's working. But if there ever was a need or desire to change, it might be beneficial to do it that way. So I don't know if Bill on the IT side or Greg had any comments.
I wouldn't add much to that, Chief, through the chair. With the Black Castle one, we weren't sure how it was going to go, so we went short term, and then it's been going quite well. So we've been moving this one forward and more forward as we've been achieving some pretty incredible results and moving this forward. So, and the other one, you know, I guess it's not like a car. You can't take it to any garage to get it worked on. These things, in terms of niche and Hexagon, they're proprietary. They have the keys. They have the software, and so we're invested in a relationship with them for the long haul, for as long as we intend to use their product.
I think in the back of my mind, what I wonder is that, you know, when we carry on these relationships for a very long period of time, and we tend to be paying just a little bit more each year, I understand that. I'm just wondering if there are maybe technological breakthroughs or improvements or things like that, and are we really paying what we should be paying? And I guess I have to assume that you're on top of that.
Yes, sir, we are. And we're also battling inflation. We try to negotiate back with these vendors as well. In the case of Black Castle, we've had them on since 2018 with no increases either. So I think they were long overdue, and I can tell you that in this case, it's an unbelievable value for what we're getting. In the other cases, the other vendors, we do and have been successful in the past in negotiating lower increases, or we would revalidate our licensing and actually remove some things that we're not getting use out of. And this year it's been a little tricky with some of the increases that these vendors have imposed, and it is a tough spot.
Thank you. I'm prepared to move this, Mr. Chair. Thanks. Can I actually indulge you to, or to ask that you move 4.3, 4, 5, because they're all essentially the same.
I'm happy to do so. Thank you.
Do you have a question now?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
The questions I have is, are these in the present budget or the new budget?
They would be in both.
They'll be in both budgets? So they're being accounted for already?
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Could you second that motion for me then?
I will.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, that motion, or that vote was on 4.2, 3, and, sorry, not 2. 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, and 4.6. So that takes us to, and 7. That takes us to 4.8, acquisition of human resource information system. Is anybody, this is sort of new business, or it's a new acquisition, so can somebody give us an overview of this?
I know, I think Tracy just left the room, Jeff's here, but we have I mean, it's in the capital budget to invest in a HRIS system, which is apparently incredibly complex, but it's in the capital budget. But I think it's been put off another year, if I describe it that way, Greg, or sorry, no.
Yeah, Chief, thanks, through the chair. This is a notification that the project will be accessing capital, which we're required to tell you about before we go and do that. So it's more of that sort of step. An RFP is being assembled. It'll be released this year.
2023.
Pardon me?
Next year.
Next year, sorry, that's right, next year. I don't think in terms of years clearly enough. But coming very soon, and in order to go to market, we need the approval to access the capital funds.
But just to capture what was said earlier, these monies are already allocated and in the budget. Okay.
Yes.
There you have it, folks. And Nav, do you have a question?
In the new budget?
Which budget?
In our capital budget.
Oh, no, in the capital budget. Yeah. Can I get a motion? Ingrid?
I have a question.
Yes.
So this is primarily to go for the RFP to make the selection of the HRIS that we wish to introduce here. And it's too bad Tracy isn't here. It's a system that is going to be used for HR tracking, for analytics. It is not a system that we are going to use as an ATS for recruitment purposes, like an applicant tracking system.
No, it's not. We already have an applicant tracking system already. Now Tracy's back. This is typically what you would know as an HIRS system. So you're right. So this is going out to select which one of those systems would be, and this is just basically complying with the bylaw to say this is what we're doing and this is where we're at.
And what role? I see we've got E&Y involved. Is E&Y there to help us make the selection?
You'll allow me to answer that. Thank you. Yeah, they are not involved in our selection process. They were involved in collecting the information as to the needs to allow us to prepare the RFP to be able to go out into...
Who makes the selection?
There's a committee. There's an HRS committee.
So all internal?
Yes. With the senior leadership is there, and I'm the program sponsor.
And we all know that we have to be very, very careful because these are peculiar animals. They change constantly. And vendors are known to overcommit and underdeliver, especially with a big ticket item like this. So be on your toes.
And to your point, that's why Tracy is our program sponsor, assisted with Bill, so we can cover off the technical part. People much smarter than me, we'll make sure we watch out for that.
And where I read that in the event, if the project advances more quickly, the service will need to reallocate operating budget funds to support any 2023 costs. Trust me, it won't go quickly. It will not. I guarantee you, we're optimistic.
Are you though?
Mark my words.
Lisa, then Kurt.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, you're right, they can be interesting animals. A question in regards to the scope of work for E&Y, I'm going to have my back to you. So they were helpful in preparing the scope of work. Were they helpful also in determining an implementation partner scope of work, or will there be a secondary implementation partner procured? I will let my colleagues speak to that piece.
Yeah, through the chair, the RFP itself will include those services. Sorry, I'm behind you here. The RFP itself will include tooling for those services as well, so that upon the award, we'll have basically a full and complete package of new system, any migration of data that we would choose to do, although it's going to be relatively impossible because of the systems that we have today. So it's going to be a nice sort of greenfield start out with this system once it's awarded. And so we really don't see a need to have anyone else past that besides the vendor and our own internal staff to move us into production use of the system.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Kurt?
These systems, I agree with what's being said. I mean, these systems can be very challenging. It was part of the work of the consultant to touch base with other organizations of similar, size, responsibility, and that kind of thing to gather as much intelligence as possible around the direction to go in. Was that part of it? And then I have a bit of a follow-up.
To the chair, yes, sir, that's been done. We've checked with a number of other police services as we were pulling our requirements together beyond what Ernst & Young did for us. And it absolutely confirms that it's a wild animal. And we're respectfully, aloof in approaching this and making sure that we're not over-specifying things or under-specifying things, because we want base functionality met, and we actually do have a fair bit of flexibility within some of those domains of what the system will do for us. So we've done that. It's assisted us greatly, and so some of the ideas we've gotten in how to structure the document, which will be released, we found some great ways of doing that through those collaborations. So we feel it's going to add quite a bit of value to the process.
Thank you. I guess a follow-up, Mr. Chair, is what involvement do you anticipate the board would have going forward? And I'm particularly interested about, in the HR scheme of things, what's in and what's ultimately going to be out. What are you going to try to incorporate in this system, et cetera, et cetera?
So, through the chair, we've identified a number of key areas of processes that we'd like to automate with this. I don't have the list with me today, but Tracy, I'm not sure if you can recall what those headings are right off.
Yeah, we have our there's the generalized data management pieces, there's the compensation and benefits pieces, there's the recruitment facets we've put as optional, we have onboarding. I'm trying to think offhand. We have categorized them as to the main functionality of the system, and I think to Ingrid's point as well, we have a lot of other subsystems, so we have a lot of optional items that we've included in there as the details of our matrix. So that'll come out with the RFP. So I don't want to get into too much detail here in the public forum because it'll be released soon, and it has those matrix and the asks is what we're asking for in the HRIS system. And then we're going to look at future asks as well, which we're doing as a committee. So those aren't included in the RFP, but they are discussed at the committee level as what our needs are and the links and the migrations with all our other systems already in place at HRPS.
Future role of the board, when will this be coming back, do you anticipate?
April, May?
Right, I guess it would, not exactly a requirement of the bylaw, but an update.
Will be about May, June. We'll be able to come back to the board as to where we are as far as the process. And then the next steps as to what we see, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
And then any needs will come at a future date once it's reviewed with the deputies and the chief as well, if we have any other needs going forward, whether budgetary or resources.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Further questions? Kurt, would you mind moving this for me? Thank you. Seconded by? Can I get a second, please? Ingrid, thank you very much. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, let's move on to, we finished our discussion items. We're moving on to operational verbal updates. Chief, deputies, got anything for us today?
I think we got ahead of ourselves on Project Takedown, so. But that was one good one. I don't think there are any others. Some for in-camera, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. Members of the board, I want to draw your attention to the action.
Oh, could I have a question? I have a question. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
I hear that there are a number of threats, electronic threats that are being received concerning Ottawa or Oakville Trafalgar High School. And someone told me the other day that they were becoming of a nature where some parents are reluctant to send their children to school. And I don't know anything about it. I mean, I could maybe guess what has prompted some of this some time ago. But do you have any comment on that? Or would you prefer in confidential?
I have that plan for the in conference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'll draw your attention to the action registry that you'll find in your agenda. Mr. CGO, do you want to review that with us?
The big one, the budget, was just dealt with in this session, and the rest are in the new year.
Okay. Any questions about the action registry?
No.
Thank you. It's been moved to receive, seconded by Elisa. Thank you very much. All in favor? That is carried. Any new business? Sorry, we have our public correspondence, which has been received and read and logged in to Dilla Trust. Can I get a motion to receive the public correspondence? Ingrid and Nav, thank you very much. All in favor? That's carried. Does anybody wish to raise any of the public correspondence at this time? Thank you. Members of the board, is there any new business to come before the board today in public session? I am not seeing any. So I guess the only last thing to do is to, as we are signing off of our public session, which means we end our streaming for today, and we move into a closed session to deal with confidential matters. I want to wish those of you who are leaving us a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Holiday. I hope that you have a great time away with your friends and family over the next little while. And if you're working, thank you for your service, particularly to probably all those new recruits are all working on Christmas Day that we met last night, right? So
Kind of jealous there, they're doing all that.
So to all of our officers to all of our staff that have to work over the holidays, you have our utmost gratitude, and I know the community is so thankful for the work that you do. And to those of you watching on YouTube, thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for, I don't even know where to look anymore. There's a camera there. Thank you for tuning in and keeping abreast of the activities of the Halton Police Board. You're always welcome here, and we look forward to your questions and comments by email or through our website or through social media. Thanks, everybody. I will look for a motion to move into closed session. Ingrid and Kurt, all in favor? That is carried. We are going to move into a session closed to the public to deal with confidential items on our agenda. It is now 11:45. I'm going to suggest that we take 10 minutes for a quick refreshment break.